Welcome back to Green Dolphin Science U. It's really great to have you with us again for another deep dive.
Yeah, welcome back, everyone.
Today we're diving into something that might just make you pause the next time you reach for the salt shaker. We're looking at a study out of Bangladesh that took a really close look at microplastics, specifically in commercial sea salt.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area. Maybe a little unsettling, too. This study, it was published in the Marine Pollution Bulletin.
Right.
And they basically analyzed 18 different brands of sea salt, stuff collected from, various markets right across Bangladesh.
18 brands. Okay.
Their goal was pretty straightforward, really. Just find out if these salts had microplastics, what those plastics were like, their characteristics.
And the risks, presumably.
And, consider the potential health risks. It's a direct look at just how pervasive this plastic pollution thing might actually be in our food.
Okay, so 18 brands of everyday sea salt. The million-dollar question then, did they find anything?
Well, yeah. The answer is pretty eye-opening right from the get-go.
Oh.
The study found that 100% of the sea salt brands they tested had microplastics.
Every single one. Wow.
Every single one.
Yeah.
So the story isn't just if there's plastic, it's really about how much and, what kind, which tells a much bigger story about plastic pollution.
Okay. So not if, but how much? What kind of numbers are we talking about?
I actually quantified them, yeah. The average was around 471 microplastic particles per kilogram of salt.
471 per kilo.
Yeah. But there was a range. Some had more, some less. The lowest was about 300 particles per kilo. That was in a fine salt from Narangan.
Okay. And the highest?
The highest hit 670 particles per kilogram. Found in a coarser salt, this one from Chittagong.
670 in a kilo.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot of tiny plastic bits. How does it stack up, compared to salt from other places?
Yeah, that's a really important question for context, right? To understand the scale. The researchers noted that the levels in this Bangladeshi sea salt are pretty similar to what's been reported in China.
Okay. Similar to China.
But interestingly, they seem to be higher than what some studies have found in places like India and Spain.
Higher? Really?
Yeah, higher. Which kind of suggests that, local factors.
Yeah.
Things like waste management practices, maybe industrial activity in the region. They could be playing a pretty big role in these contamination levels.
So it's not necessarily the same everywhere. Regional differences matter.
Exactly. It highlights that this isn't like a uniform global problem.
Yeah.
Local context is key.
Right. So we know they're there. We know roughly how many. But what are these microplastics? What did they actually look like? Size, shape, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah. So size-wise, the vast majority, nearly 75%, were in the range of 300 to 1,500 micrometers.
Which is, how small is that in real terms? Can you see them?
Well, 300 micrometers is about the width of 3 human hairs. 1,500 is 1.5 millimeters. So, yeah, mostly visible as tiny specks, maybe some smaller than a grain of sand, some a bit bigger.
Yeah.
And the study does mention that these smaller sizes are potentially, more concerning for health. The thinking is they might be more easily absorbed by the body.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, so tiny specks may be visible. What about color? Was it just clear plastic? Or
no, quite a mix, actually. Black was the most dominant color, making up about 21%.
Black? Why black?
The researchers think this might be linked to things like fishing gear. Nets, lines, they're often black.
Ah, okay.
And also maybe black plastic sheeting sometimes used in the salt production process itself in the salt pans.
Right, direct contamination.
Could be. They also found other colors, though.
Yeah.
Transparent blue, gray, red, orange. Quite a mix.
So fishing gear, plastic sheeting sounds like direct pathways. And the shapes. You said specks, but were they all little bits? Or?
No, not at all, actually. Fibres were the most common shape, made up almost 40%.
Fibers, from clothes.
Could be from clothes washing entering the waterways, or maybe from food packaging materials. Some packaging uses cellulose-based polymers that form fibers, and also, again, those nylon fibers from fishing lines and nets.
Okay, so fibers are number one. What else?
Foam was next, around 22%. Then you had fragments, just sort of irregular little pieces at 13%, and then pellets, like small roundish bits at about 11%.
Fibers and foam leading the way. So we know the size, the color, the shape.
Yeah.
But what kind of plastic are we actually talking about, chemically speaking?
Right. So they use a technique. It's called ATRFTIR to figure that out.
Okay, fancy acronym. What does it tell us?
Yeah. Basically, it identifies the type of polymer. like the plastic's chemical fingerprint.
Gotcha.
And they found 4 main types. Polypropylene, PP, was the most common. That's your yogurt pots, bottle caps, that kind of stuff. It was about 47%.
Okay, nearly half.
Then came polyethylene, PE. Think shopping bags, plastic films. Those were around 29%.
Right.
After that, PET, polyethylene terephthalate. That's mostly plastic bottles, just over 15%.
Okay.
And finally, polyamide, PA, which is often nylon, like in fishing lines or some textiles. That was around 8.7%.
Wow. So basically, all the common plastics we use every single day, bags, bottles, containers, fishing gear, it's literally ending up seasoning our salt.
It really highlights how connected our waste is to our food supply, yeah.
So how is it getting in there? Did the study pinpoint the main routes during salt production?
They identified several key pathways, yeah. Probably the biggest one is just the seawater itself. It's already contaminated.
Right. So when you evaporate the water.
Exactly. You concentrate the salt, but you also concentrate any microplastics that were floating in the water.
Makes sense. What else?
Then there's the direct use of plastic films, sometimes laid down in the salt pans to help with evaporation, desiccation. Those can break down over time, shed particles right into the salt.
Okay. Direct shedding.
Mm-hmm. Also, atmospheric deposition. Tiny plastic particles just settling out of the air onto the salt pans.
Airborne plastics, too. Wow.
Yeah. And then, of course, just the general marine pollution background. Fishing activities, waste from cities, tourism. It all adds plastic debris to the environment, which then breaks down.
So it's coming from everywhere.
Pretty much. And finally, the study also points out there aren't specific standards in Bangladesh for microplastic levels in sea salt. And maybe hygiene practices during production aren't really set up to tackle this specific issue yet.
Right. It sounds like a bit of a perfect storm of potential contamination sources. Okay, this is where, it starts to get a bit more concerning for us as consumers. What did the study say about the potential health risks?
Yeah, they did look into that. They ran what's called a health risk assessment using a couple of the different methods.
Okay.
One was the Polymer Risk Index, or PRI. You can think of the PRI as like a danger score.
Yeah.
It considers both how much of a certain plastic is there and also how sort of inherently harmful that type of plastic is thought to be.
Right, because not all plastics are equal in terms of potential harm.
Exactly. So the average PRI values they found ranged from what they classified as medium hazard up to high hazard. And some specific salt samples, S4, S7, S12, S13, S15, they were actually classified as high hazard.
High hazard, why?
Well, it's linked to the presence of certain polymers like PE, polyethylene, and PA, polyamide, which have higher inherent hazard scores in this index compared to, say, PP or PET.
Interesting. So even though PP was the most common, the presence of these others bumped up the risk score for some samples?
That's right.
Okay, what was the other measure they used?
That was the Pollution Load Index, or PLI. The PLI gives more of an overall sense of how polluted the salt is with microplastics. Generally, it sort of puts it into a risk category.
And what did that show?
In this study, the PLI values indicated what the researchers termed a considerable microplastic pollution load. It fell into their risk category, too.
Category 2, considerable load. Okay, so both indices are pointing towards, a significant level of contamination. What about translating that into what we might actually be eating? Daily intake.
Yeah, they calculated that, too. It's called the Estimated Daily Intake, or EDI.
Right.
They based it on the World Health Organization's recommendation for daily salt intake in Bangladesh, which is 5 grams per person per day.
Okay, 5 grams of salt.
Based on that, their calculations suggest we might be ingesting somewhere between 0.02 and 0.05 microplastic particles for every kilogram of our body weight every day, just from salt.
0.02 to 0.05 MPs per kilo of body weight per day. How does that compare? Is that a lot?
They did compare it to some other studies looking at dietary exposure, just to give it some context. It's certainly contributing to our overall microplastic intake.
Okay, so we are potentially eating these tiny plastic bits every day. What are the actual health worries the study brought up? What could this stuff do?
Well, the study discusses potential issues based on the existing scientific literature, what research suggests could happen.
Right, the potential effects.
Yeah. Things like oxidative stress on our cells, cytotoxicity, which basically means the particles could be toxic to cells' potential tissue damage, like necrosis. And also the possibility that these tiny plastics could actually move, translocate from our gut to other tissues in the body.
Moving into other tissues, wow.
Yeah. There's also concern about potential damage to DNA, localized cell damage, which could trigger inflammation.
Okay, that all sounds Not great.
No. And there's another angle, too. Microplastics can act like little sponges in the environment. They can absorb or latch onto other nasty contaminants like heavy metals or persistent organic pollutants, POPs.
So you eat the plastic, you eat the toxins stuck to the plastic.
That's the concern, yes. And finally, there's also the possibility that harmful chemical additives, things put into the plastic during manufacturing, could leach out directly into the salt and then into us when we eat it.
Okay. Additives leaching out, too. It paints a pretty concerning picture, even if, the exact long-term effects are still being figured out. Definitely makes you think.
It does.
Let's zoom out a bit. What about the salt industry in Bangladesh itself? Are there specific things happening there that might make this worse?
This study does touch on some relevant contexts, yeah. For one, salt production in Bangladesh has been on the rise, and there are more and more people involved in salt farming.
Okay, growing industry.
And interestingly, there's apparently been a bigger shift towards using plastic sheeting, specifically polyethylene, in the salt cultivation process, in those pans.
Right, you mentioned that as a contamination source.
Exactly. Oh. So while it might make production more efficient, it could also be adding significantly to the microplastic load as that sheeting breaks down or gets damaged.
More plastic use in production equals potentially more plastic in the salt.
Potentially, yeah. And it's also, unfortunately, a known issue that Bangladesh is one of the top countries globally when it comes to mismanaged plastic waste ending up in the ocean.
Right, so there's just a lot of plastic around in the environment to begin with.
Exactly. A large pool of plastic debris available to break down into microplastics that can then enter the salt production chain.
And was this the first study of its kind there?
The researchers emphasize that there actually hasn't been much research specifically looking at microplastics in refined sea salts in Bangladesh before this. So yeah, this study is pretty significant as a baseline, as a starting point.
Okay. So you've got a growing industry, more plastic being used in the production, and a big national challenge with plastic waste generally. It all seems to kind of converge on this issue, doesn't it?
It really does seem that way. This study provides some really crucial initial data, hopefully can help, guide future research and maybe the development of strategies to try and reduce this contamination.
Okay. Well, we've certainly taken a deep dive into this study. It's given us definitely a lot to think about. Let's just quickly sum up the main takeaways.
Sure. So, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
This study found microplastic contamination is, universal in the commercial sea salt they tested from Bangladesh.
Right, 100%.
Yeah. The amount varies. The types of plastic vary, different brands, coarse versus fine salt. We've talked about how we're exposed through eating salt and the potential health risks scientists are looking into. Mm-hmm. Things like cell damage, inflammation, maybe even taking in other pollutants stuck to the plastic.
Yeah, it's definitely a hidden side to something we use constantly without a second thought usually. So for you listening, maybe take a moment to think about the bigger picture here, the implications of all this plastic pollution for our food chain, for the environment. Mm-hmm. What questions does this bring up for you about, food safety, how things are made, our reliance on plastic? It really kind of pushes you to think critically, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About our own habits, the impact of all this waste.
Absolutely. And, as the researchers themselves concluded, we really need ongoing monitoring. We need more research to fully get a handle on the risks, and crucially, to figure out effective ways to minimize this stuff getting into our food.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this pretty eye-opening deep dive into the world of green dolphin science.
Thanks for having me.
Until our next exploration, keep asking those questions and stay curious.